Okay, so this week is a very interesting week in the life of South Africa and my adopted home, as it's the elections coming up on Wednesday. So the world will be watching to see what happens. But it hasn't stopped people, hasn't stopped the recruitment market, and it hasn't stopped people from sending in questions, which has been brilliant. So yeah, keep messaging me, please. Keep messaging me on LinkedIn, which is where most people are messaging me, asking me to address a certain question on their job search or on their career path, or certainly send me an email to rob@thegrmgroup.com. But LinkedIn seems to be working very well as well. I've got three questions that sort of stood out to me this week that I want to address. The first one is, and it sounds really simple, but it's actually needs a lot of thought, is when is a good time to move? And this particular lawyer who emailed me or messaged me that on LinkedIn was really talking about how long into a tenure with a particular law firm or with a corporate, when is a good time to move on? And the way that my answer is always the same, especially, let's take law firms, for example, okay? So they'll break it down from a financial perspective. They'll break it down the cost to the firm, total cost to the firm over the course of the year, the time spent training and developing, or time spent with support staff, associates working with you. It's a lot more than just one salary and medical benefits and things like that. So they'll look at that, and then they'll times that by the number of years, and then they'll look at what that person needs to make to turn a profit. It's fairly common knowledge that within law firms, certainly at senior positions, that you're not really turning a profit for the firm until year two. So it's pretty important for them that one stays ideally 4+ years. So that's coming from the side of the employer. As this person and that messaged me and others that might be interested in this, just bear that in mind, okay? Because when you go to another firm, they're going to be asking themselves that question, which is, for you, 2 years, 3 years might seem like a long time, but when they're looking at your CV and they're looking at your LinkedIn profile or whatever it is, they're going to be looking at, okay, how much are we going to be spending in that time? And do they have a history of leaving after a certain period of time? So my advice to you is to try to stay 4 years plus. But if you can't possibly do that, if there's reasons to move on, promotions perhaps, pay rises, whatever it might be, just bear in mind of what your future employer is looking at and what they're looking for you to do. Next question that I had this week that came in again via LinkedIn was, when should I move in-house? Now, I have my own views on this, and I can just tell you from a global perspective, because obviously every single market is different. In South Africa and sometimes in Kenya and Nigeria as well, which I've noticed more so than any other country that I've recruited in, there seems to be a tendency to move in-house quite quickly. Partly because the in-house positions come up and they look for junior lawyers, but also there's a hunger and a desire to get out of practice fairly early. What I would suggest to you would be to try and stay in practice as long as possible. In-house will always be there if the positions are there, and the more senior you go in, the better. But you also, because practice is where you refine your skills, is where you sharpen your tools. It's where you're at the coalface, as it were, of the law, doing the deals, running the cases, running the files. And that's something that you're going to learn something new every week you're in that. So my advice to you is, and to this particular person as well, is don't be in a rush to become an advisor. Stay as an attorney as much as possible, a deal maker, a case closer. Do that for as long as you possibly can, and then go in at a higher level. And the last question I got this week was again about moving, but it was specifically about moving overseas. And this particular person that I was chatting to on LinkedIn was really about, it was a huge conversation we were having about when and where and how to get overseas, but it's specifically about the when, tying in with what we were talking about on these other questions as well. When to move overseas? Well, what I said to this person was, largely that's going to be driven by the country that you go to, because again, and I said this on last week's update, but I'm going to reiterate it just in case you missed it. It's largely a question of immigration. Most countries have a stipulation that you cannot move there without a certain number of years' experience. Makes sense. The whole point of highly skilled immigration is that you are bringing some to the country that they do not have. If you are just straight out of university, well, most countries have a lot of workers that are looking for work straight out of university. So it's typically 2, 3, 4, 5 years post-qualified experience, PQE or PAE in some parts of the world. So it might be driven by the country that you move to. But again, whilst I am a big advocate of getting international experience, don't go too early and don't leave it too late. I think it's really important that you build up at least 5 years of post-qualified experience in your home country before moving over. So not just a question of immigration, but also because the firm knows that you've been around a little bit, you've been through the mill a few times, you've been through the tough times for a few years, so they know a little bit more about what they're getting.